And with that, we are live. Welcome back at the Light 'em Up Lounge. One and all, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're joining us from. A big hello, a big welcome here at the Light 'em Up Lounge with another exciting show. And finally, this week, we made it. We have James Brown from Black Label Trading Company with us. Last time we had to take one on this, and unfortunately, James couldn't join us because of the weather situation in Nicaragua back then. We had a wonderful community show instead, and we sort of discussed amongst the Light 'em Up family and friends and fellows a little bit about Black Label trading, the industry in general. But today we have James with us, and I'm delighted and honored to welcome James joining us directly live from Nicaragua for an exciting show. So without further ado, James, welcome again. A big thank you for taking the time, joining us here today and sharing some of your experience, your story, and the background of your wonderful accomplishments and your various brands that we're going to explore during the show, together with all of our wonderful guests, friends, and fellows. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
James, at the beginning, one thing that I would love to ask you is, the world of premium cigars can mean a lot of different things to different people. How do you look at it yourself? Do you consider it a form of art, craftsmanship? It's just a matter of taste. What does it mean to you personally? And what is that wonderful world to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the industry as a whole, kind of a broad spectrum, it can be quite a few different things, you know. And I think for a long time, cigars, even on the premium cigar level, were kind of just a product, you know. And people smoked them. They didn't put a lot of thought into, you know, what they smoked. They kind of chose something that they liked, and that's what they smoked every day. And you know, would buy a box, and that was kind of it, you know. And I think that when I started to get into cigars and have an interest in cigars, I felt very much as a consumer that there wasn't a lot out there, not only from a flavor point of view, but also, you know, branding and marketing that really spoke to me as a consumer. And so, you know, I think what we focused on as a brand when we decided to do this was that we were going to kind of break that mold and do things quite different, you know. And I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in Nicaragua and see that manufacturing process, see the growing process. And through that, it really opened my eyes to what a real art form this is, you know, even if it's not being perceived that way by a lot of the consumers around the world with the products that they're getting. And so that was really my focus when starting this brand, was to highlight that artisanal quality of cigar making, you know, and to do things differently, not only from the manufacturing side and the processing side, but also to the branding side, you know, and the business side in the US as well. So I think the industry as a whole is very healthy because there's a lot of different layers and there's a lot of different parts to it. And we all kind of work together and meet the different needs of all the different consumers out there.
That's wonderful to hear, and it shows your broad spectrum, your wide variety of experiences and fields of expertise and just the different impressions of life that you have had before you entered the industry. Now, you own the business in Mexico, in West Africa, I believe, Guatemala, now Nicaragua. Where's actually home for you? Do you now consider Nicaragua the place that you would call home, or is there even such a thing as home to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, over the last 20 years, my wife and I, you know, like you said, we've kind of been all over and done a lot of different businesses. And, you know, kind of our trend was to start a business, build it up, and within 5 to 7 years, sell it and move on and do something else. And you know, when I got into the cigars, that for me was very much a passion driven business. And I think it's the only business that we both agree has really, you know, kind of stolen our heart, and we, you know, have absolutely fallen in love with it. And not only with the business itself, but, you know, Nicaragua. I mean, this is finally the place I think where we can put down roots and call it home for the first time, you know, in the last 20 years. So yeah, I can't foresee us anywhere else doing anything else. So this is kind of it for us.
Where did that initial curiosity come from? Or would you say that you always had that entrepreneurial mindset and spirit, specifically when you mention, you know, starting things, building them up, doing your exit, selling off the business, and then move on and start something new? Is that something you inherited, something that came through the family, or just out of personal curiosity?
No, I think it just it was always kind of something in the back of my mind. Like when I was young, I always really wanted to travel. You know, we didn't travel much when I was a kid and growing up, and I just had this fascination with, you know, seeing the world. And you know, that kind of went on, and when I was in my early 20s, I started in the wine industry, and that, you know, allowed me to travel some, and, you know, France and California, and really got me involved in things outside of the United States. And I kind of fell in love with that. And then I met Angela through the wine industry. And I think we both were just at this point in our lives where, you know, we were kind of like, you know, this just isn't it for us. You know what I mean? Like we kind of want something different. You know, it's a big world and there's a lot out there, and, you know, we both are just the kind of people that kind of go for it, you know, and ask ourselves, you know, really what's the worst that can happen. And so we left to go on our honeymoon to Mexico, and just never came back. So, and that was kind of it. You know, we had some of our stuff sent down there, ended up starting a business and, you know, buying a home, and we were there for almost 4 years, and that kind of started everything. And you know, it just we really enjoyed life outside of the US, you know.
The wine world is, as you mentioned, a very interesting one, and there's a lot of similarities and parallels between premium cigars and the wine industry. My own background is in wines and spirits with the WSET. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Where do you see like the analogies? What are the things that you feel those worlds have in common? But then where do they clearly differentiate themselves? And probably also why did you feel at some point, no, this is not for us. This is not where we want to be for the rest of our lives?
You know, I think that if I was involved in the wine industry now, things would probably be a lot different, because at that time, you know, 20 years ago when I was a sommelier, the wine industry had a very sort of pretentious feel to it, you know, and especially on the high end restaurant side of things. And, you know, I just wasn't really that person. You know, I wore a tuxedo 6 days a week, and, you know, a suit when I wasn't wearing that. And, you know, the clientele was of a certain level, and, you know, and to me, I had a great passion for wine and I loved it. But I didn't like the pretentiousness that was kind of revolved around the industry at the time. And there were a lot of, you know, really interesting things happening then. That was kind of the big boom of a lot of these small boutique companies out of California, that were really kind of taking a different approach and doing new things and kind of chucking all the old rules. And so that was very exciting for me at that time. But the industry just wasn't really following that trend back then. And so, you know, I just felt myself kind of falling out of love with wine a little bit, and I didn't really want that to happen. And so at that point, I knew that I was going to be happier as a consumer, instead of being involved in the industry and seeing all these things that I didn't really like. And so at that time, I decided to kind of move on and do something else, and wine would just be a part of my life in a different way.
Did
I
you
think
ever
that
feel, So, sorry if I interrupt you there, James,
No, go
but
ahead.
did you ever feel the same with cigars, or was there ever a moment where you had that same fear, if I may say so, about losing the passion for it because of the business side of it?
I think that in the early beginning, yeah. I mean, I think anytime that you take something that you're passionate about and turn it into a business, there's always that fear. At what point does this become more about the business and less about what I'm wanting to do? But I think the difference is, you know, being the person that's behind the brand and being the person that's manufacturing the product, that keeps me, very much hands on in exactly what I'm doing. Whereas, something like the wine industry, when I was involved, you know, on the retail and the restaurant side, you're very much out of control of what's going on, and you're just kind of a small piece in the puzzle. Whereas now, starting our brand and doing what we do, we're very much able to try to push consumers in a different direction, open people's eyes up to what cigars can be. And we kind of have this mission that we want to accomplish, and so that's where we're working for
Mm.
towards all the time. And so I think it makes it much different. To go back to your other question about kind of the comparisons, I think that's a major thing. I think that wine overall, it just has a different feel to it. I mean, yes, it is more mainstream now than it's ever been, especially in places like the United States, where you can walk into a grocery store and buy, tons of what used to be exclusive, hard to find wines. But I don't think that it is kind of like cigars is just, to me, it's more for everybody. You know what I mean? Like, you have every level of society that are smoking cigars, and the great thing to me with cigars is that when you walk into a cigar lounge, everybody leaves everything at the door, and it's like you're all there, you're on the same page, and you're doing what you love, and you're taking that hour or 2 hours and just kind of meeting new people, and everybody's on the same playing field, and I think that that's a really cool aspect of cigars, and I love to see that when I'm out on the road and visiting retailers and consumers. As far as like what I learned in the wine industry, bringing that to cigars, I mean, yes, being a sommelier and learning about your palate, learning about, how taste works and smell works and all those things was definitely something that I transitioned into cigars. But it's very different. A liquid, whether it's a wine or a spirit, affects your palate very differently than smoke. But I think the great thing that I was able to do was, as you kind of train your palate and learn more about tastes, especially, that's one of our most primitive instincts and memories is taste and smell. That kind of gets embedded in your brain very significantly. And so at this point with cigars, what's great is I have a very kind of my memory works in flavors. When I think about a tobacco, I know exactly how it tastes. When I think about a new blend and what I want it to be, I can kind of, it's almost like cooking. I can pretty much piece that together in my head ahead of time with the flavor memories. And then, then it's kind of at the end, whether it needs a little more salt, a little more pepper, that type of thing, to kind of get it exactly where I want it to be. But it's been a lot of years getting to that point.
I couldn't agree more, and I certainly hear you. With my background in wines and spirits and as a bartender, then when you start creating, developing recipes for drinks, similar to when you create the blend, you refer back to your sensory database of previously
Right.
stored aromas and tastes that you combine to create something. It's a magnificent process, and I would love to see that, especially in today's day and age where everything is digital, everything is fast paced. We sort of reconnect a little more with our senses and with our sensory tools that we're given from childhood days on, because as you rightfully mentioned, it's so deeply engraved in our being, in who we are as humans. And it's one of the most emotional things that we all have with us. So if we can re-emphasize that a little more and become more aware of our surroundings, I think that is very important, especially in today's day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think that that's kind of one of the cool things is that cigars are focused around taste. They're focused around smell, and those memories kind of stick with people. You know, like if you're smoking a cigar on this particular day, doing whatever it is you're doing, that becomes a part of that memory. You know, and I think that that's kind of a cool thing that, you know, cigars definitely stay with people in those experiences.
We had an interesting question to that as a little add-on from Stephen Newman over on Facebook. Do you feel like there's a natural talent or gift that you need to have for blending, or is it purely based on your learning experiences, on building that sensory database?
I mean, I don't think that it's. I think the best way to answer that is like not everyone, you know, to become a sommelier, for example. Like some people are just blessed with a good palate. You know, and it's just one of those things. Like, yes, you can do certain things to elevate it and bring it around and increase your ability to taste and all of that. But I think at the end of the day, for me personally, I was just very lucky to have a good sense of smell and a good palate, you know, and being able to develop that over time in the wine industry and then to transition into tobacco. You know, it was a very long process with tobacco. And what I would do is kind of, I took the same route as with, you know, learning flavors from the wine industry is, you know, every time that I wanted a cigar went on for a couple of years is, you know, I would pick an individual tobacco, you know, Seco Estelí, and I would just smoke Peritos of Seco Estelí, you know, and what I'm doing is training my palate to know exactly what are the attributes of this tobacco? What does it taste like? How does it affect the palate? What's the spice component like? And just over and over and over. And then, you know, that's the thing is it's a very long process. And I think that some people, you know, it's one of those things where they don't get as much as other people out of things, and tobacco is one of those, you know. And so I think it is something that you can kind of teach yourself for sure and kind of elevate what you're tasting and to be able to recognize those flavors. But it is a long process, you know. It's not something you can do just smoking a finished cigar, because a finished cigar is going to be a melding of a lot of different flavor profiles, you know. But you know, yeah, if you take the time and you have the ability, you certainly could, you know, train yourself on individual tobaccos. And then the cool thing with that is, you know, once you do smoke a finished product, you can kind of say, okay, I definitely taste the Ometepe, I definitely taste this and that, and it all kind of comes together.
Please allow me just a little deep dive question to something that you mentioned earlier, and I know a lot of our folks and everybody watching, they love the geeky stuff. So when you mentioned the comparison between the way a liquid affects your palate or hits your receptors in comparison to the smoke, how do you work with that? What are the things that you learned about the way that a cigar and the actual smoke conveys its various messages, and how did you then tweak that in order to work alongside your sensory experience that you had from other industries and fields of expertise?
Well, I think what stood out to me the most is how much more in depth smoke can affect your palate than, say, like a wine, right? A wine or a spirit is a very full mouth flavor, right? And yes, you bring some air into it to kind of open up those flavors, but kind of on the whole, you're tasting with your entire palate. Whereas what I find, you know, the most unique and interesting thing, especially with the variations of tobacco, is the way that they affect your palate on so many levels. You know, like for example, certain tobaccos, the spice component is going to hit just the tip of your tongue, or other tobaccos may hit the sides of your tongue or the roof of your mouth. The flavor profiles are going to, you know, change through the retrohale, like spice components, creaminess. So that not only do you have flavor, you have spice component, Then you have texture, right? Smokes have different textures to them depending on which tobacco it is. Some smoke is very heavy, almost chewy and creamy. Other smoke is a little bit thin, it dissipates very quickly. Is the tobacco, does it make you salivate? Does it make your palate dry? Is it harsh on the back of your throat? Is it, there's just so many different aspects of how smoke affects your palate. I think it's way more than when you're talking about wine and spirits. You get so many more variations, which I think makes it, as far as blending tobaccos together, a more difficult process, because you're having to figure out not only the attributes of the tobacco, but I always like to say that each tobacco has positive and negative attributes to it. And you have to figure out what to put it with to highlight the positives and play down the negatives so that the finished product is not showing any of these negative qualities to it. So it's a lot to kind of figure out to create balance. And that's really what I strive for in a cigar, is I want it balanced, because that's kind of, for me, that's when, all the stars align. Everything is good when you achieve that balance between strength and flavor.
Speaking of all these various intricacies and how challenging it truly is to create a magnificent cigar experience there. In retrospect now, when you look back at your own journey with premium cigars, in particular as a manufacturer, do you feel like right at the beginning, you already were in a place where you felt very comfortable and you had all that previous knowledge and you could implement that right away? Or was it more like a process where you started to explore your own way of working with tobacco, and so like the work with Black Label Trading Company was sort of a progress and an evolution, and it was only during that process that you figured all the things out that you just shared with us?
It's a little bit of both. So kind of a little bit of my backstory before Black Label. We actually owned a kind of a high-end adventure travel company throughout Latin America. And that is what allowed me to spend a lot of time in Nicaragua and to kind of delve into tobacco and cigars more than I had in the past. And so I actually, before Black Label even started, I spent about 3 years learning everything that I could about tobacco, processing, manufacturing. All my free time I spent in Estelí just is learning as much as I could. And during that time, I started to play around with blends, and I would use them as cigars for our customers through the travel company, who a lot of our customer base, they were big cigar guys. And so that was a good kind of testing ground for things. So it wasn't like I just came out when Black Label launched, that it wasn't my first go round as far as blending cigars. So I had a little leeway to it of quite a few years of trying to figure things out and get exactly, things tuned in to what I wanted Black Label to be. But that was the stepping stones, to first fall in love with that aspect of it, and then to kind of put my hand to it and see if it was something that I could actually do. And so only at that point did we decide to move forward with launching a brand.
Speaking of your factory, Fabrica, Oveja, Negra, and I hope I pronounced it semi-correctly, translates to black sheep. And doing things differently was always a core value of your various endeavors. Where does that come from? Is it sort of a youthful and positive revolutionary spirit? Or did you feel at some point that the cigar industry just needed a different voice and a different take on things?
Yeah, I think it definitely did, and like I said, being able to spend that time and see factories and see the manufacturing process and see how traditional and old school this industry actually was, especially on the Nicaraguan side of things, it just really kind of, it opened my eyes very early on that things could be done a little bit differently, and I'm kind of the mindset of like, how are things going to progress and move forward and change if we're doing everything exactly the same way we've been doing, since the 1950s. Like, it just, to me, that didn't make sense. You know, I want to do things differently, and there's a different approach, and, you know, kind of a younger, newer way to look at things and look at the industry and look at, you know, what it is to make a cigar, and the types of people that want to smoke, you know. And I felt like there was a big disconnect between a lot of brands and kind of the new era of cigar smokers. And I considered myself in that group of new era cigar smokers, and wanted to do something for people like me and kind of keep things moving forward.
Now, as with music, one could probably argue that every song, every tune must have been invented already throughout the centuries and history. Do you feel that way with cigars? Have we seen the majority of profiles and different blends, or do you truly believe that there is always room to be radically different?
I mean, I think it's you know, I think it's tough. I think that it is a difficult thing to stand out, because at the end of the day, right, it's a cigar. Like, it's made a certain way, and, you know, you use these types of tobaccos, but I think it's all in how you treat it, right? Like, you know, we don't process our tobacco the same as other people. You know, we're geared towards this kind of bigger, bolder profile, you know. And I always like to experiment with tobaccos from all over, and treating them in a different way. You know, we use a lot of broadleaf varietals, but we don't use them as wrapper. We use them as filler. Same thing with things like Mexican San Andres. And so we try to think outside the box, that, you know, just because this has traditionally been used as this, it doesn't have to be. You know, like, let's try it like this, and let's try it like that, and let's try processing it this different way and see what happens. And so I think there still is a lot of room for experimentation, and, you know, using varietals of tobacco in different ways that they haven't been necessarily used in the past. And, you know, it just keeps things interesting. And there, you know, even when you're dealing with kind of the core group of tobaccos, I think there's always a way to add some uniqueness to it, for sure.
In that process, do you feel like you had to go through even more learning experiences and failure because you're trying something new? So sometimes, you know, a blend just wouldn't work at all, and it's back to the drawing board, and you have to take a little more of those learning curves and steps.
Absolutely. You know, and then, because that's the thing, is like, when you're dealing with tobaccos and you use them the same way they've always been used, you know what to expect, right? You know, whereas a lot of the stuff that we do, you know, it is a lot of trial and error. And is it going to work? Is it not going to work? What's it going to be like in a month? What's it going to be like in 3 months? What's it going to be like in 6 months? All of those different things come into play. And, you know, especially with a lot of the cigars that we do, which tend to be, you know, multiple ligeros, very heavy, dense filler tobaccos, you know, we kind of have to take into accountability the combustion of it, and all of those different things. And so, yeah, there's a lot of layers to it. And, you know, we have definitely experimented with quite a few things that never made it to production, just because it didn't make sense in that aspect. And we've also kind of struck gold a few times as well, you know. And it is that trial and error. I think Bishop's Blend is a great example of a cigar that, you know, we definitely did great with after, you know, a lot of experimenting. That cigar took me probably close to 2.5 years to get it exactly where I wanted it to be. And I always tell people, you know, that cigar came out in 2016, and it's not a cigar I could have made any earlier than that. It was kind of a culmination of a learning experience, you know, from 2013 all the way till 2016, of things that I had learned on the manufacturing side, and the blending side kind of went into that cigar. And it is a very unique blend also, you know, where we figured out a way to process Connecticut broadleaf and Pennsylvania broadleaf into the filler tobaccos, and to, you know, work with other Nicaraguan tobaccos to balance it out. And so it was a fun project, and I think we were successful with it.
If I remember correctly, one of the few core philosophies that you clearly set in place from the very beginning is besides defining unique flavor profiles that you probably wouldn't see in cigars on such a regular basis, it was also to stick with the sizes that make sense and the most sense. And if the cigar works well in one size, why bother with five others just to complete the range of having your Robusto, Toro, and maybe 6x60. In regards to the sizes, where do you start? Is it the idea for a particular blend, a certain tobacco that you would like to work with, and then you have to see which vitola could possibly suit that blend best? Do you have a standard vitola when blending even? Share a little bit about that process for you, please.
Yeah, so when it comes to different vitolas with cigars, I always tell people each vitola is basically a different cigar, right? Like, yes, you want to keep these fundamental elements that say this is a last rites. But as far as like the blending process goes, you're basically blending a whole new cigar per vitola. Usually when I start with something new, I usually test everything in like a 5.5 by 46. And for me, that's kind of the perfect balance between filler wrapper ratio in terms of the flavor profile. And then from that point, I either, go up or down depending on where we want it to go as far as the vitola size goes. So, but that's kind of my base standard as far as blends. 5.5, 5 by 46. That ring gauge just gives a good representation of what the blend actually is with the wrapper on it.
And when you hit that sweet spot and the blend is where you want it to be, how do you then decide which vitola will be the very best representation of that?
It's really trial and error, because I kind of have an idea of what I want the cigar to be, mentally. And so a lot of times the 5.5 by 46 isn't exactly what I want it to be, and then by taking it up to like a 50 ring gauge or a 52, or, taking it down to like a 42, changes everything about it, So I just kind of have a mental idea of what I want this to be. And then it's a lot of trial and error to get it to that point.
Because I guess also just in terms of practicality, right? If you downscale from a 50 to a 42, as you mentioned, you have less room to play with, less tobaccos that you can use, and the other way around, it's exactly the opposite.
Right, and once you go down from say like a 46, the cigar becomes more about the wrapper, right? So the wrapper is going to become the dominant profile in that cigar, and as you go up in size in a vitola, the wrapper is going to play less of a role, and the filler tobaccos are going to be more dominant. So yeah, it's always just a question of which flavor profile are we looking to amplify, and really have it showcase. But yeah, I definitely don't understand, and I don't really think like when I see 5-6 vitolas of one particular cigar, I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because it really specific blends, they really shine in certain sizes, and it's to me, outside of 1 or 2 vitolas, maybe 3, things just start to get a little muddled, and it's really not what you were going for as far as the blend.
Now, when we go back to the evolution of your various brands, but the company in general, you had plenty of experience in various countries in Middle and South America, but opening your own factory is a very bold move that a lot of brand owners strategically decide not to do, and rather work with somebody else and not take as much burden on their shoulders. How did you venture into this? And was it a strategic plan from the get-go, or also a bit of a creative head over heels?
No, we were more forced into it. So we started like so many other small brands out there. And when we started, we were manufacturing at another factory, a larger factory. And we were kind of sold on this idea that we would be able to buy our own tobacco, do things the way that we wanted, produce the cigars that we wanted to make. And, we were living in Guatemala at the time. And so I was coming back and forth to Estelí. And things started out okay. We were doing all our tobacco purchasing. The cigars were being made the way we wanted to. And, after about a year and a half, things started to kind of slip through the cracks. The cigars were not smoking well. The profiles were not what they should be. It became very obvious that the tobacco we were purchasing was not going into our product. And we actually received an order, which for us at that time was a big order, but we took about $70,000 worth of cigars and had to throw them in the trash. And so at that time, we just kind of had to ask ourselves, if this is really what we want to do, we have to own the process. We have to do it ourselves. We can't rely on anyone else to fulfill our vision, to do things the way that we feel like they should be done. We don't have the ability to be as artistic and creative as we want to be. So we either shut it down or we move to Nicaragua and we need to open our factory, which at that time financially was not the best thing for us as a company. But, sometimes you just have to take the leap and hope for the best. And that's what we did. And we started very small in a very small space. I think we started with 4 teams. We would get super excited when a shipment was like 8,000 cigars, and it was awesome. But we had that freedom to do what we wanted to do and experiment, and and it felt great to do that and to be able to say, like, this is our product. If I'm going to put my name on something, I want to own the process. And so it was really awesome to be able to do that, and it was a massive struggle, for us, not only as a company, but as individuals. I mean, we were poor for a long time because everything we had just went back into tobacco, went back into the factory, and just kind of slowly kept building it up. And, at that point we had been around for 2 years, which is a very short amount of time in this industry. And so, it was about telling that story and getting the product out there to people and letting them know that we're doing it differently, and this is what it's all about.
Besides the very obvious challenge, cash, what were the most challenging aspects for you during that time and during that process?
I think it's difficult because you're with the cigar industry as a whole. I mean, if you're going to manufacture, if you're going to have a factory, you have to be there, and so it was a very tough balance between spending majority of time in Nicaragua, living there at the factory every day, and also trying to run, the business in the US, because there's a lot of road time involved, getting out there, meeting retailers, seeing consumers, going to festivals, all those things. And so it was an extremely difficult balance in the beginning of trying to be in 2 places at once and keep, both aspects of the business running smoothly, because it really is 2 different businesses linked together. Whereas, we didn't have anybody in the States that could, be me and go out there and do what I needed to do. So that was very tough.
This is actually something that I wanted to ask you specifically, and I'm glad you brought it up, because the distribution model and the retail side, as you mentioned, is so vital to the business, but something completely different from being down in Nicaragua and the manufacturing side. Unlike a lot of other US-centered brands, you live in Nicaragua. How do you translate the experience to the US soil and internationally, still conveying the essence of the brand? Where do you keep that balance?
So what we've been able to do, which is great, is as we've grown as a business, as Black Label and Blackworks have grown on the US side, Oveja has grown on the Nicaraguan side, we've been able to bring in, in-house sales teams, national sales manager, all of these different aspects that kind of free up my time to be more in Nicaragua, And so it's been a great way for us to grow in both sides of our business. So I still spend a lot of time going to the States and doing those types of things, but it's definitely not what it used to be. And thankfully, it doesn't need to be, because we have an incredible team in place of sales reps and brokers and our national sales manager that really keep things moving on that side of it.
That's a very valid point, because a lot of companies are actually centered around the one person or the one family behind it, which also means they're somewhat dependent on those people being out there, traveling, showing their face, spreading the word, and sharing the gospel.
Yeah, and I think that for me personally, my most important place is here in Nicaragua, because at the end of the day, the cigars need to be solid, right? They need to be what they're supposed to be. And I personally feel like even though we have a rock star team at our factory, you have to be there. You know what I mean? And you have to be present. You have to have influence. You have to oversee exactly what's going on in those processes. And to me, as much as I love owning, the brands, at the end of the day, I'm a cigar maker. And that's where my passion lies. And that's what I want to do. I want to be in Nicaragua, and I want to be, producing these cigars. And I think that's the most important place for me to be. And unfortunately, a lot of people just don't spend the time in country to, see all of those different facets of the process.
On the other hand, though, what becomes the challenge then is to keep that strong core, keep that message that you want to bring across consistent and always to the point. What do you think is the gravity, the force that pulls all the people back to the core, and how do you feel like you were able to manage to build not just a brand, but more like a movement or a cult or a common belief that people gravitate towards, and then happily share the message and help you build the brand?
I mean, I think, right when we were coming out in like 2013, it was kind of this big boom of social media cigar presence, right? Like a lot of groups were forming and pages and things like that. And, we were always very conscious early on that we're not creating a cigar brand, right? We're creating a lifestyle brand. Like, I want people to smoke my cigars, but I want them to also be able to relate to the brand, right? I want the branding to speak about what the cigar is, because I feel like every cigar tells a story. And I feel like early on, we were able through, social media, not only through our company promoting it, but through individuals promoting it. So, when we launched, we were hardly anywhere. I mean, and so we kind of created this kind of cult-like following of people that had actually had the product or seen the product. And those guys were very active, online through social media. And it just kind of was this thing where people started to see it and, well, where do I get that? And, all these things. And thankfully, I think that a lot of people just relate to the brand on a lot of different levels. At the end of the day, yes, it's about the cigar, but it's about the feeling the cigar creates for people, and it's like, that's the cigar that I want to smoke, and we were very lucky, I think, that people latched on to not only the cigars, but the brand as a whole, and really pushed the brand, and got people talking about it, and got people questioning about it. And, over the last 10 years, that's translated into them not only talking to their friends about it, but talking to their retailers and saying, people are smoking the cigar everywhere. If you open social media, you see it everywhere. You have to have it, and that's really, we've never done advertising. We've never done a lot of these things. It's been this great process of growing very organically through the people that fell in love with the brand. And it's been awesome to see that.
Do you actually believe that with the social media landscape, constantly changing and evolving. And we now see that with Facebook, Instagram, it's so hard to create organic reach and even get your message across and into people's feeds. Would you believe that this will change the whole dynamic and the landscape for new brands that probably start anew and do not have that sweet spot of when a certain social media channel actually blows up and gives you a lot of organic reach?
Yes, I think it definitely is going to be difficult, and it's going to continue to get more difficult. I think when we started, we were very lucky in that sense that things were relatively new and there wasn't a lot of noise in the industry. Whereas now, it's kind of this pay to play type deal, which is actually, that's fine, but it is extremely limiting when it comes to tobacco products, so there's a lot of ways that we can't do that. But yeah, I always tell people like that are launching brands today, it's a tough road. I mean, even when we came out, I mean, when you're talking about the amount of competition that was out there kind of in our same genre and all of that, it was very small. Whereas now, I mean, it's just more and more and more. And so, yeah, I think for anybody that's just getting started, it's a very tough road. And I think that this industry as a whole, it is just much harder than anybody anticipates it being, as far as putting a new product out in the market, having it received by consumers and retailers. I mean, it's probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And I feel like, thankfully, ignorance was bliss. If I knew then what I knew now and the road that I would have to go down, it may have been a different story.
That's a wonderful comment. Good point that you make there. Just a brief follow-up on that. Where do you think that the whole social media pathway will actually lead towards for cigars in particular? And the reason I'm asking this is pretty much every week on the show, coming from different angles, we discussed this, and last week with the Stogie lads, they have a super successful Instagram. They started their podcast, and we were talking a lot about if Instagram suddenly decides to ban tobacco content entirely, where will those people go? And we see new platforms popping up, and Dojoverse has been around for a long time. Discord is something that quite many people gravitate towards. In the old days, it was traditional forums or boards. Like, what do you feel is next, or where will the industry gather to still have a secure spot or a fenced off area where people can interact and share their content?
I don't know, but I do tend to think that it is leaning that way. I mean, I think that we do have to prepare ourselves for a lot of over-regulation on a lot of levels, and I think social media is definitely one of those. I mean, for myself in particular, like, I know that my account has a shadow ban on it, just because I can run the analytics and see that it doesn't reach what it reached, 2 years ago or 3 years ago or any of those things. So I think that, I hope that there are other platforms that come up that are friendly for people. But at the end of the day, I think get out there and go to your lounge. You know what I mean? Like, socialize with real people and, talk to retailers and see the products in person. And that's really what I love about the industry. Like, I mean, social media is obviously great, and it's great for putting the message out there. But I think as for the cigar experience, I mean, I'm just kind of old school in that regard, I guess. Like, I love being in a cigar lounge and, being around people and talking about it and having that social, like, real face-to-face aspect of cigar smoking. It's one of the things that I fell in love with the whole industry. But yeah, I mean, it's really, really hard to say, but I would say I wouldn't be surprised if more regulation came through Facebook, Instagram, all of the platforms.
How very true. And I firmly believe that our means of communication as human beings will always fundamentally stay the same. What changes is the platforms or the channels that we use in order to get that message across. And we'll have to be flexible and to adapt to new challenges that we're all facing. But I couldn't agree more with you on the aspect of personal experiences and face-to-face interactions and meetings will always be key and will always dominate the cigar landscape. That's for sure.
Yeah, and one thing that I actually really loved about, when COVID happened and all the lockdowns and all of that, what I loved to see was how many people, went to platforms like Zoom and had all these, and continued to have these, moments with other people smoking their cigars and, having that same social aspect to it, even though it was virtual, was very cool to see that, people didn't just let that go. Because they couldn't go to a lounge. That was really awesome to see the community come together and figure out how are we going to keep, hanging out and smoking cigars together.
Yeah, and we started Light 'em Up right during the first lockdown, and it was an opportunity for all of us to stay connected and come together. And me personally, everything that I do in my life is about analog experiences and sensory, right? But still, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to come together, despite you sitting in sunny Nicaragua on a Wednesday afternoon, and I'm here in Brussels, and people join us from all over the place. So ultimately, it's about merging analog and digital experiences and creating something special together there.
Definitely.
James, I'm so very happy that we have so many people joining us and commenting over on Facebook, besides everybody here at the lounge. Calita Fuente is with us, Cynthia, and I want to, from heart, congratulate Cynthia on all the wonderful family news and her proud role as a grandma. Art was commenting, Art Garcia, that he's a proud neighbor of yours in Estelí, and he applauds your wonderful new aging room. So again, it's true testament to the community and how strong our cigar family is, that we have so many people with us. If anybody has any questions over on Facebook, please put them into the comments. I'm always checking and following. I know we have a lot of questions piling up here at the lounge, and one comes from Peter. I would love to get to that. A question that I'm very curious to learn more about. Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Reinhard, and James. It's great to see you. I've got two questions for you, but first, I just want to leapfrog on what you said about social media and how the brand has impacted it. I don't do Instagram, but I'm on your Facebook group, and every day there's dozens of people posting pictures of what they're smoking. And it's quite obvious that these people have integrated your cigars into their own identity of who they are as cigar smokers. And I think it's really a powerful thing, like you were alluding to. I'm on a cigar forum. It's still old school, but we do a Zoom meeting every night, and two of the guys that I smoke with regularly are on here too. And on the cigar forum, we do an annual poll of what's your top 10 cigars, and Black Label stuff is always on there, 3-4 entries in everybody's top 10. And so we love your product. We enjoy it. I'm smoking a Bishop's blend right now. But two of the questions I have, and maybe I'll give you the easy one first. Is there any way that you can add something to that little white label that's on the back of the cigars with the UPC regarding the year that the cigar was produced? It's like I've got 4 years worth of Bishop's blends, but unless I mark each cigar in my humidor, it's like I have a hard time keeping them straight, which is which. Not that it really matters, but I like to have an idea about which year it is and kind of compare how I think the blend is aging.
Yeah, it is something we looked at. What we've done is, I mean, Bishop's a really good example of that. And what we've done with Bishop over the years is there are kind of slight differences you'll notice in the labels. So the 2016 year was kind of this orangey red color. Yeah. I believe the year after that, we did kind of a cool dot pattern in the background of it, and it was definitely more red foil. Then we had the 5-year anniversary. Then we had, and like I think this year we have, or last year or the year before, we had like 2 crosses on the sides that were kind of clear, like a different color of black. This year we have 2 red crosses that are going to be on each side of it. So we try to change up the labels a little bit on that stuff. And then the info is always on the box, but we're kind of limited into what we can fit on those little UPC labels.
I gotcha. The other question I've always kind of been curious about why there needs to be Black Label Trading Company as well as Blackwork Studio. In your mind, it's like, what's the distinction?
So I kind of feel like our cigars are more an extension of myself. And I feel like there's kind of 2 different sides of my personality, you know, and I always describe it to people as kind of like Black Label's more like the punk rock and roll side of things, and you know, Blackwork Studios is more the kind of urban hip hop side of things. And you know, we started with Black Label, and you know, over the years Black Label has, you know, grown significantly. I mean, it's still a very, you know, small brand in the big scheme of things, but I would say that how I describe it is Black Label is more the mainstream of what we do. And Blackwork Studios started in 2015 when we opened our own factory, with the idea being that we treat the factory very much like a studio space. You know, there's a lot of experiments and things going on like that. And so Blackworks is kind of the, you know, kind of the micro brand where we really want to focus on the artisanal qualities of cigar making. So, you know, you have cigars like Killer Bee, the Green Hornet, the Tigers, all of those things that take much longer to make. They're way more intense as far as the details and things like that go. You'll notice that most of the Blackwork stuff comes in very limited vitolas, sometimes only 1 vitola. And so it's just more the artisanal side of the business of what we do.
I gotcha. Let me just ask one more thing real quick regarding the Memento Mori. I smoked probably 3 of them since I bought them, and they're starting to mellow just a little bit, but they just seem to me to be a very high impact cigar. And I'm wondering if that was your intention with that blend.
Yeah, the Memento Mori is definitely a very heavy, strong blend, not only strong flavor wise, but strong nicotine wise. So that's probably one of the strongest cigars, production cigars we put out in a while.
Yeah, seems that way.
Yeah.
I want to say thanks, and I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today.
Absolutely. And thank you guys. I mean, I love hearing about, you know, showing up on your forums and your lists. That's really awesome. And it's always great to hear from people, and love that you support the brand, and we really appreciate it.
Right on.
Peter, many thanks for your continued support and for being here with us today. Greatly appreciated. I would actually like to deep dive a little more on one of the questions that Peter had, James, and whether it's Black Label, Blackwork Studio, Emilio, Dissident. You work on so many different brands simultaneously, each with their own respective portfolio and lines and vitolas. In terms of differentiating, but still keeping that strong core that we spoke about earlier, and you mentioned the way that people gravitate towards the brand. How do you manage to, at one hand, giving a clear, distinctive characteristic profile and character to each and every one of those brands, whilst at the same time still tying it all together and bringing it home to the motherland?
You know, it's definitely not easy. I mean, I feel like it took us a long time to get Black Label and Blackworks exactly where we wanted it to be. You know what I mean? Like when you pick up a Black Label, you know what to expect. When you pick up a Blackworks, you know what to expect. When we brought Emilio into the fold, it was kind of good and bad for me, right? Like the good was I was free to do whatever I wanted because the brand didn't really have an identity. You know, we were going to rework everything that had already existed. So I had a lot of freedom to do what I wanted to do. But like you said, like the main thing is to make sure that the brand does come across as that it has a specific identity to it. And so for me, that was a really fun project to work on things that weren't necessarily in the profile of Black Label and Black Works. Emilio is definitely more kind of that medium bodied, middle of the road style profile. And for me, honestly, that's challenging, making something that is kind of appealing to everybody. And so, yeah, it took some time, but I think that, when we first took over Emilio, we were very limited because with all of the things that were going on with the FDA and all of that at that time, we weren't able to introduce new products. So we kind of had to take the existing product and say, like, how do we give the Oveja Negra spin to Suave or side one and side two, so that was very challenging to figure out the branding strategy behind Emilio. But I think it's gone really well, and we're introducing some new products now. The new one we have coming out, the audiophile, I would say, is definitely a step up for Emilio in terms of strength and profile. Still medium bodied, but it's got a little bit more intensity to it than a lot of the Emilio stuff. And the Suave Maduro, the Suave Connecticut does awesome for Emilio, and so the Maduro is kind of the natural next step for that. But it's I think it's a brand that, for a long time, it's been around a long time, and it didn't really have a feel or identity. And I think that things are definitely coming around with it, and we're getting it to where we want it to be. Dissident, that came around a couple of years ago with the original owner. And that was something, once again, where we were kind of starting from scratch. Like, yes, it was an existing brand, wasn't around very long, but this is kind of what we had to work with name wise and cigar wise. And so I think that we did a really good job of figuring out the portfolio and what it should be, and profile wise, branding wise. And now that it's come under new ownership again, fairly recently, I think that it's in a very good place right now. And I think that moving forward, there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff happening with Dissident, and a lot of new products. And I think overall, though, the thing that you want is for anything that comes out of your factory to have the feel of your factory, right? Like, not only does Black Label and Black Works have a feel and Emilio has a feel, but I think overall, the four brands combined definitely have an Oveja Negra feel to them. And that's what's important for us. We're under this umbrella, and we really want everything to highlight that it comes from our factory. And this is what our factory is all about, which is unique blends, full flavors, sometimes full strength, and just doing things a little differently.
I also guess one of the natural challenges that comes with a broad portfolio with many different facings and SKUs is shelf space and real estate in the humidor. On top of that, a lot of your cigars are quite limited and restricted in availability. How do you manage to keep a consistent presence on retail shelves with enough facings, whilst offering an ever-evolving, changing selection of lines, often in very small quantities?
Well, it's tricky, and I think that we're kind of unique in the sense for Black Label and Black Works that a lot of brands do limited releases. I mean, that's nothing new, but with our limited releases, what we try to do is make them annual. Like, if we ever put out a cigar, it's extremely rare that it's like a one and done and you're never going to see it again. I like things, if it's a cigar that comes out and people fall in love with it and they want it, there's no reason not to bring it back again, unless you're limited by tobacco or whatever the case. But so we try to keep a rotation of the limited stuff coming in, and what we have to do is, it is very limited, and we're very limited by the tobacco that we use in those particular products, and then every year the quantities kind of vary, and it is what it is. But to make sure that, the retailers that get that product are the retailers that are big supporters, they're going to be the ones that carry the core line and support the core lines, and support the brand as a whole, and not just, these super limited things that everybody's kind of clamoring for. So we try to keep that balance. to make sure that the retailers that are out there supporting us every day are getting the limiteds. It may not be as much as they want, but they're getting.
Question from Ian, who is here with us at the lounge.
Hi, James. Really enjoying the talk. I had actually a few quick questions. First of all, are you going to take part in Puro Sabor next January? Secondly, I've got a fairly good palate for things like wine, but I'm still struggling with cigars. I know you mentioned about tasting puritos, but for the average consumer, we can't sort of do that. Is there another way we can sort of do that to improve our palate? And my third question was the names of your cigars. Your sort of very Catholic names, and also Memento Mori and Last Rites and Viaticum. It's a little bit dark there. That's to do with sort of the end of life. I just wondered where they came from and what your thinking was with those namings.
So we're not going to be doing Puro Sabor. Puro Sabor tends to be a festival centered mostly around some of the larger companies and factories. And so, we sometimes we attend a couple of the dinners and hang out a little bit, say hello to people, but we don't like participate. Like our factory is not a part of it. But I am very happy that they're having it again this year. I think it's great for the cigar industry, for Nicaragua. So it is great that they're doing that again. As far as the naming goes, I think I'm just influenced by a lot of different things, and living in Latin America for so long, I was definitely influenced a lot in Guatemala through the kind of this interesting mix between the Catholic religion and the traditional Mayan beliefs. And any street you walk down, you're seeing a beautiful cathedral from the 1600s. And so I definitely liked that kind of feel to it. And it's just one of those things where I feel like every cigar just has a particular feel to it. And when you're dealing with kind of these ultra dark, heavy, rich cigars like Viaticum or Last Rites, to me, it just has this kind of gritty, dark feel to the cigar. And so I always want the name to kind of reflect that, with the product. And so, I love kind of creepy, dark stuff and skulls and all that. And so it just kind of, it's a fine line where those things can come across as cheesy, or they can come across as kind of dark and elegant. And so that's, where the naming and the imagery comes from, is, keeping that balance of this kind of dark, yes, it is more Catholicism imagery, but it still has kind of an elegant feel to it.
And on the tasting, I know the names, Corojo and Criollo and Habano and so on, but if you give me a cigar with a blind tasting, I'd struggle to say what was in it.
Yeah, I think 99% of people would. I would just say that if you're trying to really get into a cigar, to really taste a cigar, what I learned early on about your palate is your palate reacts differently with a lot of different things, especially with what you're drinking. A cigar is going to taste very different depending on what you're drinking, depending on whether you ate 15 minutes before you're smoking it. A lot of these different things come into play as far as what the cigar is going to taste like. So I always tell people, I know everybody loves a strong black cup of coffee with their cigar, but anything that you're drinking that has very kind of acidic, bitter notes to it, wine definitely comes into play here. Although I smoke with wine all the time, it's probably one of the worst things to have with a cigar, because the acidity level is really going to affect your palate. So I always tell people water is the same thing. Like, it's like when you're tasting wines, right? Like in between each wine, you don't want to take a drink of water, because then you're just kind of neutralizing your palate, right? Your palate's in tune with tasting that wine. So you don't want to shock it. You want to keep it in that state of mind of what you're doing. And cigars is kind of the same thing. Every time you take a drink of water, you're kind of clearing your palate from all that smoke, and you want your palate to be in tune with smoking. So I always tell people, anything with any kind of sweet or sugar component to it sugar tends to keep your palate very alive and very awake. And it keeps the flavor profiles a little bit more intense. So like, if I really want to get into a cigar or into a tobacco, I mean, I usually have just like soda, whatever type of soda, and it keeps my palate very in tune to what I'm smoking. And to me, it tends to amplify the flavors. But I would say the best thing to do is to really sit down with a cigar with a few different options of something to drink and see how that affects your palate when you're smoking it. And I think you'll see a significant difference between the different things on how much flavor the cigar seems to have, depending on what you're drinking. You know, if you're going to go with spirits, I think things like, you know, rums tend to have a nice semi-sweet finish to it. Some American bourbons, things in that wheelhouse, you know, things that don't tend to be bitter or acidic will definitely help amplify the flavors.
I was thinking of identifying the components. I remember on a show, I think, you know, Dion Giolito, he sort of smoked a cigar and he could pick out all 5 leaves in it just from smoking it, which just seems to me to be fantastic, you know, that you've got the palate at that sort of level. I'll never get there, but you know, I wouldn't mind sort of getting a bit more sophisticated when I smoke something and say, oh yes, this is definitely, you know, Criollo or Corojo or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, but it's tough, right? Like, yeah, if you want to take off from what you do every day for the next 3 years and hang out in Nicaragua and smoke tobacco all day, you can get there too. It's just it's quite a commitment to get to that level. It is, yeah. You're a little dedicated at that point. So, but I would say that, you know, each tobacco definitely has its own unique set of qualities and characteristics. And you know, the more you smoke, I think the more you start to pick up those, you know. And I know a lot of guys that keep like a log book and stuff like that, and that definitely helps if you're trying to, okay, what does Corojo taste like? I'm going to buy 3 or 4 different Corojos and figure out what's the characteristic that seems the same with all of them, you know, because Corojo has this great kind of upfront, you know, sometimes intense, sometimes mild black pepper spice to it, that kind of mellows out into a nice creamy finish. And so, you know, if you take the time and try to figure it out, then I think you can definitely come up with some basic points.
Thank you.
Ian, many thanks. Great questions. Over to Steve.
Hi, James. Firstly, thank you very much for spending your time with us. It's an excellent show. I'm also interested in the names and the artwork behind cigars, particularly the saints and rainbows, serpents and rainbows, and the hyena, which is very rapidly becoming my favorite cigar.
Glad to hear it.
The artwork of both of those bands are fantastic as well, the kind of graffiti.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of influenced from all over, you know, whether it's art, history, pop culture, music, you know, it's just, there's kind of a lot rattling around in my brain. And so sometimes the name comes first and I decide, okay, I really want to do this from a branding perspective. And I kind of build the cigar around it. Or, you know, I'm working on a blend, I smoke it, kind of get into it. And it's like, okay, what does this cigar say to me? What is it? You know, and then develop the branding that way. Serpent in the Rainbow came from one of my favorite books growing up as a kid or teenager, which also became a movie. But I just remember, you know, that period in my life where I just felt like this was just so crazy and insane. And I loved the story. It was just so bizarre that it was real and all this stuff. And so, I don't know, and the name just kind of spoke to me as super unique, and, you know, just thought like, be kind of cool as a cigar, you know, like, and so that was one where the kind of the branding idea came first, and developed the cigar around it. The hyena, you know, my wife and I lived in Africa, in West Africa, for almost 6 years. Our son was born there. And so tying in the African Cameroon wrapper on it, Just kind of this, the name came from as kind of a tribute to our time living in Africa and having those experiences in our life. And a hyena is actually the animal that came uncomfortably very close to me at one period in time and scared the hell out of me. So it's kind of cool to do a hyena cigar.
Thank you. Also, one other question. When are you going to release the Boondock Saints again? Because that is also another amazing cigar, one of my favorites.
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot. It's one of those things where I would say it will come back for sure. We're just at the point where, I think we're pushing like 54 SKUs in our entire portfolio. A lot of those are limited releases. And, for the longest time, several years, we weren't able to put out new product in the United States because of the FDA regulations and all of those things. So kind of when that window lifted a little bit, our focus was, okay, now let's get out some of the stuff that we've been talking about. And since we have the ability, and we felt like that window was going to be fairly narrow. And now things have changed once again. And so it looks like, we have a lot more freedom and a lot more time to work on some of the new projects that we want to get out. And so now we can kind of go back and look at some things like Boondock, Sindustry is another one, Santa Muerte, these releases that we've done in the past that have kind of been on the shelf for a couple of years. We're looking at bringing some of those back in the next couple of years. So I think you'll definitely see Boondock make a return in that time period.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
You mentioned a film that inspired the Serpents and Rainbows. I'm unfamiliar with that film. Is that the title of the film?
Yeah, Serpent and the Rainbow. Yeah.
Oh, right. I shall have to check that out. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm very happy and honored that Ricardo is here with us again at the Light 'em Up Lounge. And Ricardo, many thanks for taking us on a bit of a virtual tour with you through Nicaragua recently. Great content that you shared, great videos, and it almost felt like we had the pleasure of being there with you. Thanks for you being here with us today. And you had a question and a comment for James as well. Welcome, my dear friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reinhard. You know how much I admire the work that you do, and I do apologize. It's been a while since I haven't had a chance to come and join you. I think I suffer from the same thing when a year ago I decided to go full time into this industry. Nobody told me. I didn't have a real clear indication of how much actual work this takes and how much energy and time to needs to be dedicated to really do it properly. And eventually it just drags you and brings you and doesn't allow you to do all the things that we would like to do, as come in and join you and hearing you interview great cigar makers.
Ricardo, I couldn't think of a better reason for you to join us less frequently on the lounge than you actually being part of the industry full time. And what an amazing job you guys are doing over at Tour Imports in the UK. So massive congratulations on that, and no apologies whatsoever. It's always wonderful to see you and see all of our other guests here at the lounge.
Great. No, thank you. And we did miss you in Las Vegas. We'll have it lovely to see you there. I know gonna try on the next one, and hopefully we get a chance to see you in Germany.
That's for sure. 100%.
I had a kind of a comment I wanted to share, and then a question for James. And first of all, James, it's impressive and honestly amazing to hear you speak about your journey, your cigar, and your whole process of blending. Which to me, it's the making in itself. It's what attracts me to this industry. As a Nicaraguan, I love brands and everything else is very important. But I think when you have that level of respect for the art in itself and you're able to bring that personal ability to create something so special with that artistry and that ability, is quite remarkable. So it's the first time I'm actually getting a chance to hear you a little bit more. I think we were all so busy in Las Vegas. I was really fortunate that we were able to pinch Angela, your better half, to take a bit of her time and speak and hear and learn a little bit more about the brand. Because first and foremost, I have to say I'm in love with your cigars. I think the everything that I've tried so far, and I was very fortunate because in many ways I was introduced to them by a good colleague of mine, John, Strange, who's here with us as well from Toy Imports. And John is one of those that said, Ricardo, you need to try this. If you haven't, you're missing out big time. And he was absolutely right. And same with Ray. Some point Ray tells me, Ricardo, this is my favorite brand. You need to try this. And I'm so lucky that I not only had a chance to try them, and you guys were really, really generous with, you know, some of the samples I was able to devour when I was given an opportunity to do so, both in Vegas. And then the first factory I visited as soon as I got into Nicaragua was your factory. It wasn't any other factory. That's the first one that I really had a desire to get to see and learn about. And again, I was very fortunate that Angela was there to host me and show me around. Briefly met Parker, your son, again with a Nicaraguan accent. That's incredible. I mean, that to me, it's not even my son, which is the same age, he's 15 as well, has a Nicaraguan accent. He has a crazy accent. So that, have to say, what really impressed me and really connected with me at a personal level, first than business or anything else, I could feel you, Angela's and Parker's love for Nicaragua and the people. That as a Nicaraguan, there's something that's really hard to express how it makes us feel, right? When someone from a different country goes there and it shows the level of respect and love that you're given to the people that work there. I mean, I could feel that straight away. You know, I was coming in, I came in and I was talking with the ladies at the entrance before Angela was on her way. And right away, there's a vibe, there's an energy. I can feel these things. And that's really, really hard to articulate. You have to really feel it and see it. And the way they feel part of something, I walked in there and there could not be anybody else's factory. It feels so your brand. It's incredible. I think I've been very fortunate in these sort of 6 years, but more than last year and a half, working more full time to visit many factories in the Dominican, in Nicaragua, and so on. But I think this is one of those that right away, it's almost like walking into your house, and your brain in a way. That's amazing. I think what you've been able to achieve there, first and foremost, my comment is one of gratitude, because the way you're treating our people and the way Leiva, who runs operations there, a mastermind of cigar making as well, how he described the process. And I had a good chance to speak with him to tell me his own journey to how he ended up working with you guys and how he's managing operations there together with you. That was really, really incredible. And I have to say that blew my mind completely. And now I understood it. I think I seen the brand. I love the cigars. I really enjoy speaking with Angela and hearing people see, but when I saw and I experienced it, now I understand a little bit also what Peter, the Vint, which I'm bastardizing the way your name sounds, Peter, the way you described the brand and said, Ricardo, you need to pay attention to this. So I'm grateful. First of all, thank you. Thank you for the way you look after our people. And thank you for creating these amazing cigars and taking the time today, James. I genuinely mean it.
No, absolutely. You know, Nicaragua, it's a special place, you know, and it's, like I said, it's one of the places out of numerous that we've been. I mean, even through the rest of Latin America, where we feel like we're at home. You know, this is our place. This is what we're meant to do. You know, and I mean, we're pushing almost 100 people at the factory now. And I mean, it's just awesome to, you know, for us, it's interesting because, you know, people come into our factory and they have the kind of the same thought. Oh, this is very different, you know? And so getting a lot of our crew on board with this idea that, you know, we're not going to do things like the other places that you worked before. And this is why, and, you know, here's a write-up in whatever magazine for the cigars that you made. And, you know, it's awesome to see our staff kind of come together as this family, that we're all working towards the same goal, you know, and to see the pride that they feel when we do get, you know, these great high ratings and awards and whatever it may be. And when people come from somewhere else and, you know, talk to them and are like, you know, I hope you know what you do is incredible. Like, you know, and so it's really cool to see them grow and evolve with the brands and with the company. You know,
and see it in their eyes. That's what's incredible. You know, there's a thing that us Nicaraguans, we didn't have a lot in terms of products like this that made us proud, personally, like myself growing from the 80s. And now when you have something like this, right, and you can see the pride in the young people and the new generations working, and, you know, the people rolling, the people bunching, the people working in the different processes, that's incredible. And that's a testament, I think, to to what you dedicated. I mean, you sleep there, you live there. That's really incredible, I have to say. And in terms of the brand, I mean, I think we Latin Americans, we have this interesting relationship with death. And that's really, really attractive to me. I think we see it as almost like a part of life. It's not like something we celebrate, almost like Santa Muerte. And it's something that not many cultures can understand, that it's not just a Catholic element to it. It's deeper than that. It's more about how we relate to something so natural in a celebratory way. And you've been able to put that across. Obviously, black, personally, also my favorite color. So I love that element to it. But ultimately, it's the cigar. But I have to say, everything that I've tried, it's incredible. So great kudos for that. Great gratitude for that. And I think the sort of question I've had is, so when you're looking now, you've been able to develop in the US market quite successfully to what you want to achieve. How are you looking into the international side of things? I mean, what is your take and your sort of your strategy, I suppose, in that way? How you want to grow that, or do you want to grow that? What are your thoughts into the way you want to eventually share through more proper channels, if you want to put them that way, through retailers and stores and lounges, say here in the UK or other places around the world? What's the kind of method you want to follow? How you want to go about it?
Yeah, I think for us, it's something we have to learn, right? Because we're 100% familiar with the U.S. market, right? That's our backyard. It's our focus. It's obviously the biggest market. And so, we've been in Europe for quite a few years now, Germany, Belgium, Switzerland. And we've done one inter-tobacco and we'll be going again this year. And I think what we learned the first time around was two things. I think we went into it very concerned that the European market was not quite ready for Nicaragua yet, that it was still very focused on Habanos, and the Cuban aspect was still going to be very strong. But after our first inter-tobacco, we saw that has changed significantly. So, I mean, the amount of people, retailers and consumers both, that are embracing Nicaragua and embracing kind of new, interesting products and things like what we're doing, that was awesome to see. Just the reception that we got was more than I could have hoped for, and the business itself has done really, really well over the last few years. But it is a learning process for us, because each country is very different. Different types of retailers, different scenarios on whether they have lounges, they don't have lounges, different types of customer base. So it's all a learning process. And I think for us, the other thing that we learned was that when we deal with the European market, we really need to slow down. Like, we're used to the US where, at PCA, I mean, we're writing massive orders all day, every day. It's just, boom, boom, boom. Whereas the European market is it's a little bit slower, a little bit more chill, takes more time. And so, we've really kind of wrapped our heads around that, I think, and we're ready to go into inter-tobacco this year with kind of a different mindset of, we're not here to write, 200 orders. We're here to talk about the brand and, get people interested in it, and, the sales will come. It's just not what we're used to in the States. But I get very excited about different markets. I mean, anytime somebody kind of, I love that moment where somebody lights our cigar and it's almost like a light switch goes on, and it's like, this is something different that I haven't had before. And so I love introducing the product to new retailers, new customers, new regions. I think it's very cool to see people's response and their reception to it.
Thank you, James. And that's great. I think that having that humble approach to the process of learning, right, rather than coming with a recipe that you think you're going to work and you go with it very aggressively, that's when I've seen mistakes sometimes, when people give it for granted. There is a one size fits all, and right. There's quite nuances between the markets, right? Despite being Europe as a whole geographically, is being able to have the patience really to understand and see how that's coming. Ultimately, the product is there. I think the branding itself, one thing I forgot to mention is that I know how hard it is in this industry to come up with something that is meaningful, that stands out, but is original. And I think of all the industries in the world, this is one of those where regionality seems to have a really difficulty in being able to be protected in many ways. I mean, I've had long conversations with people that are very creative into branding. For example, Robert Caldwell from the Dominican Republic, right, from Miami, but Robert Caldwell brand, guy who's really creative into what he does, right? But then you start looking at a lot of copying, a lot of copycats around, and that must be really hard, right? When you have something so unique, when you don't have that ability as in other industries, nobody will dare try to copy the Coca-Cola sign or the Nike sign or the Apple sign. That's so protected that nobody messes with that. In our industry, there's a lot of space for, which is humbling, I imagine, when somebody's trying to copy you. That shows that you're doing something right, but at the same time,
yeah,
kind of
I mean,
takes
it
away.
is. It is, and I mean, this industry is very unique in the sense that good, bad, whatever, branding is imperative to being successful in this industry, right? Like there's not a lot of other businesses where you're going to walk into a tiny little room and you're going to have 200 to 1500 of your closest competitors within inches of your product, right? And so the product has to be unique. It has to stand out. It has to speak to people, and it has to make them want to try it. And then when the product is good and it's what they expected it to be, then they come back for it. But it is a very difficult aspect of this business, and I think that at the end of the day, yes, there are some other things that come around that have similarities and things like that, but I think ultimately our brand works, and I think marketing works in general when it's authentic, right? It's hard to replicate the authenticity, like I said, like our brand is an extension of myself, it's an extension of Angela, it's an extension of our factory and everybody that works there, and you just can't replicate it. As hard as you try, it doesn't come across as the same thing, and that's the thing.
It will come as a copy of that, but that's not going to be right. No, but well, look, you have us here to help in any way we can at any point. Hopefully we'll get a chance, I'm sure, to see you there in Dortmund. It will be a crazy place, I think. It's always very manic, but I'm sure we'll find hopefully a chance to see you there. Wish you great success. And the one thing I wanted to say to Ian, one thing I fairly recently discovered to help me, because I'm in the same process trying to understand the origin tobaccos, right? And I'm very fortunate that I can go to a factory and they have to kick me out with a whole bunch of puritos in order to get rid of me. Otherwise, they cannot get rid of me. So that works well in my favor. But one thing that I've kind of been doing a little bit more with finished cigars, and maybe you want to try that, when maybe if at the beginning of your cigar you smoke it, and then if you do a little incision and you take off the wrapper, then you smoke just the binder and the fillers, smoke a bit, then you cut off a little bit more, and then you just smoke the fillers themselves, and then you kind of go the other way around, so you can kind of do it in small, an inch or two of each one. That's something that a cigar maker and blender that I have recently met, I have great respect for, Luciano, they're from in Estelí, kind of was practicing with me, and I found it as an easier way if you're able to go and get them directly from the factory. So maybe next time we see you, we'll have a go, maybe smoking some of these great cigars from Black Label that way, and see what you think about.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It was good to see you again.
Likewise.
Ricardo, many thanks for your wonderful comments and for all the kind remarks. Cynthia Fuente just commented over on Facebook as well that what wonderful words, and how blessed we are in this industry to share such precious moments. And James, as you rightfully said, where else would you find so many competitors side by side, put into a little room, into a little walk-in humidor, where everybody's sort of competing for shelf space and people's attention, but yet here we are all coming together, sharing incredible moments and wonderful memories and experiences together. And only
I think that's one thing that I think it's one thing I'll say about the industry as a whole is that, obviously, yes, we're all running businesses, we're all competitive, we all want to do better. But I think as a whole, I love that no matter how big your factory is, how small your factory is, how many cigars you sell a year, or whatever it is, I think as a whole, we all kind of come together, and we're all kind of fighting the same fight And I love that about this industry, that it yeah, I mean, oftentimes there's a lot of egos involved and things like that, but that's just natural, competitiveness. But I think as a whole, I mean, especially like, I can only speak to Nicaragua because that's where I live and that's where we have our business. But, never have I had anybody from another factory, another brand, anyone not try to help me out if I needed help, and I just love that about this industry, that, we're all kind of in the same boat, and there's nothing wrong with us working together to achieve the same goals, and we already have enough legislation and everything else trying to bring us down, that it's great that we help each other to keep things moving forward.
Very true. And it's little things. I mean, just like, so many different manufacturers and brand owners joining the same Zoom call, sharing wonderful words about other companies, other brands. That's a wonderful testament to that very special community and the industry that we're all blessed to be in and be a part of. Over to Ride in Dubai. Buddy, I know it's getting late there, but thanks for being with us and hanging in there.
You know me, I'm always there. I try to be here as often as possible, buddy. Hope you're doing well. Jay, what a pleasure to see you again. PCA, we chatted a bit, and I thank you for giving me the time. Angela was an absolute star. I mean, Ricardo has said it all. I could not have possibly said it any better. But me too, you've been very kind and generous. Give me a lot of cigars that I've devoured. And I have to admit, the meeting I had with you guys was the first meeting that I had. And there's an interesting story behind that. I was online with one of my teachers, one of my kids' teachers, my eldest daughter. And she asked me out of the blue, she's like, so what do you do? And I'm like, I am in the cigar business. She's like, oh, that's interesting. My friend Angela, they have a cigar brand. And I'm like, Black Label? She's like, yeah. I'm like, I just sent her an email this morning. This is too weird. So the coincidence was just so amazing. And this is another thing, if I may add, that I love about this industry, of how things naturally and eventually connect with one another. So your meeting was the first meeting that I had. You gave me a cigar. It was the first cigar that I lit that morning. And let me put it this way, it gave me an amazing start for the whole show. I wanted to congratulate you on all the work that you're doing, and definitely want to tell you that we're very, very, very excited about having your cigars in Dubai and in the region as a whole. It's shocking to me the amount of people that walk in and ask about your cigars. I have to admit, I've heard a lot about the brand, but the first time I ever tried the brand was literally a month ago. But apparently a lot of my clients have been smoking your cigars for a while. And I had a couple of chats with some of them that go way back, and they're saying that the evolution of some of the brands that you have issued and all of that stuff. So it's very interesting. I'm very excited about further educating myself about your brand. And as I said, we're really looking forward to having you here, and congratulations on all your work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're very excited as well. Yeah, I mean, it was great. We're always, like I said, it's always awesome to go into these different markets and deal with new people and see their reactions. And so I'm very happy to hear that, that you like the cigars, that your customer base is into the cigars. And I'm glad that the brand comes across as, what we want it to, and spoke to you and made it something that you're interested in. So that means a lot.
Definitely. And please send Angela my very best. And I look forward to seeing you guys in Dortmund for sure. This is going to be a great get together of everybody. I can't wait.
For sure.
Excellent. Thank you.
Family reunion. Right. We'll all be there. I can't.
You better be there this time.
Oh, I will be. I very much look forward to it. It's going to be a very special gathering of wonderful people. Right. James, before we come to the end of the show, and obviously we want to be respectful of your precious time as well, John, Ricardo's dear colleague, had two quickfire questions here in the comments, and it sort of also brings me to a little little sneak peek into the crystal ball and into the future for your various brands, for the factory and everything that you do. John was asking if there's another cigar maker that you would possibly like to collaborate with. And then secondly, do you foresee a move in the near future to a bigger factory? So could you share with us a little bit of what's in store? What do you have planned, and how do you see the next couple of months and years, not purely for your own factory and brands, but also for the industry as a whole?
As far as collaborations go, I mean, I definitely have some people, in the industry that I respect what they do. And, I don't smoke a lot of other people's cigars. But the ones that I do are from people that, I like what they're doing. I like their dedication to what they're doing. I like that they spend, a lot of their time in Nicaragua and are very focused on the product itself. So yeah, I would be open to it. It would definitely just depend on who it was and what that project might be. As far as the factory goes, I mean, yeah, the brands overall have just had an incredible growth over the last few years, and specifically the last 3 years. We weren't really able to anticipate how much growth we were going to have. And, for a brand our size, sometimes that can become difficult. So we were definitely on the Nicaragua side, just, killing ourselves to keep up with the demand. And what we figured out fairly quickly was that the factory was definitely not large enough. And so we've just completed a expansion project there. We've doubled the size of our aging room. We've doubled our tobacco storage. We've put in our own tobacco processing area for our own pilons and things like that. And so I think we'll be okay for the next 2 years probably. But yeah, I mean, it is something that eventually we will have to move into a larger facility for sure. And I think, overall, it's been incredible to see, the growth of not only our brand, but the industry as a whole within the last several years. It was one of those things where when COVID happened, obviously with a lot of other industries as well, we all just had this giant question mark of, okay, what does this mean for us? And we kind of anticipated things slowing down tremendously, and this horrible scenario of having to close the factory and whatever might happen, and so it was really incredible to see, retailers and consumers alike just doing what they had to do to keep the industry going, and manufacturers as well. And it turned out to be, those 2 years were just incredible for the industry overall. I think everybody had tremendous growth, and that was awesome to see. And, I don't see any reason that momentum would slow down. One thing that I love to see that I'm seeing a lot of in the States is, a lot of new cigar smokers, guys that are in their early to mid 20s, their early 30s, that are just coming into it. And, they're very focused on brands like ours and other brands like us. And they really love that aspect of it. And what I like is to see these guys opening retail accounts as well. I mean, we're seeing a lot of very kind of young, interesting lounges popping up that are creating different smoking experiences for people. And I think that that's awesome to see. And it seems like that's growing and growing as well. So, I think overall right now the industry is just in a really great place. And, I think that it'll continue to go that way.
And we certainly hope so. Absolutely. Great, positive outlooks, a great perspective for the future. And I think as long as we all remember, and that goes to what Cynthia also just wrote on Facebook, as long as we all remember where we come from, where our roots are, as long as we respect the tradition, but at the same time keep the momentum for innovation and new creative spins on things, and bring incredible new experiences to all the people like you do, James, on a daily basis. then we're in a very good place as an industry and as cigar enthusiasts, because that's ultimately what we are first and foremost. We are apprentices of the leaf, we're lovers of fine cigars, and we are a big global community and family. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor for me to host you at the lounge, James. Please send our love and regards to Angela as well, and many thanks for her wonderful help in facilitating all of this and helping us with managing the show and getting you on. It's greatly appreciated, and I wish you nothing but the very best, continued success for everything that you do. And I very much look forward to seeing you in Dortmund in just a month's time, when hopefully we get to sit down and share a wonderful Black Label cigar together.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Many thanks to you, James, and to everybody who joined in today. Another wonderful, enlightening, and inspiring Light 'em Up Lounge. Many thanks, James, to you and to everybody joining us today. We wish you a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and we'll see you all again here next Wednesday, next week, here at the Light 'em Up Lounge. Many thanks. Goodbye for
Thanks,
today.
guys.
Light 'em up. Bye.